He's not as fat as Santa or as red in the face, but his beard is just as white, his laugh is just as warm and full of grace.
He's got a twinkle in his eye and a microphone in his hand.
As he spins Beatles stories of the greatest band in the land. It's the Vectisfabber Verdict, the Christmas time special show, from John, Paul, George and Ringo down to Neil in his grotto.
Hello, Merry Christmas! This is Santa Claus, and you are listening to the Vectisfabber Verdict.
Happy Christmas, Donald.
Happy Christmas, Slow Joe.
So this is Christmas, and what have you done? Another year over, and a new one just begun. So this is Christmas, I hope you had fun. The near and the dear ones, the old and the young. A very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Let's hope it's a good one and weather is clear.
Hello and Merry Christmas to listeners of the Vectisfabber Verdict. Today on the show we have Derek Manchester, author of 2 books dedicated to the theories and adventures of a dedicated Beatles connoisseur. Known only as JSD to his followers, and indeed myself. So without further ado or a don't, Derek, welcome to the show.
Hello Neil and both your listeners. Thanks for inviting me.
First I'd like to explain that your 2 books, the JSD Postulate Mystery, and the recent JSD Paradox, deal with a larger-than-life character known only as JSD in Beatles circles. Would you care to start with why he's a sort of era guru, I suppose? At least to a subset of Beatles and Wings fans.
Yes, certainly JSD, possibly Jason Donovan is his real name, is a long-time Beatles fan who came up with an assertion, or the JSD Postulate, as it's become known. Right, so JSD reckons Paul McCartney's first 4 solo albums, McCartney, Ram, Wildlife, and Red Rose Speedway, weren't the rubbish the music papers made them out to be. They weren't just a load of old cobblers, all because the press was still cheesed off at him for supposedly splitting up the Beatles and because he wasn't all preachy and political like Lennon.
Actually, JSD thinks Paul was spot on with those first 4.
They were brilliant, funky, upbeat music, a right step away from the Beatles. Cracking albums that he needed to make to get over the whole Beatles mess.
Okay, so what's so special about this JSD character? What compelled you to write a book about him?
Right, so what happened to JSD? He vanished, not like the Invisible Man. He was sectioned and then escaped. Well, not exactly. A few family and close mates know where he is. I've dug around, right back to the start, trying to figure out who he actually is. His followers are fiercely protective of his anonymity, which is frustrating, but I thought with my massive intellect that maybe we can put some bits together. Back in 1979, there were reports of some Yank bloke, all spaced out, dancing in a car park. A Sony Walkman and a Wings Wildlife cassette were found there. Can I prove it was JSD? No, but it's a bit of a clue in it. I found a quote, supposedly from a Liverpool paper in 1984. Turns out, the people who were meant to have said it in the 1980s were long gone. Still, the quote seems legit, maybe planted years later by a postulate. These are the few people who've actually seen JSD do his mumbo stomping.
Oh. Yeah, the mumbo stomp. I am familiar with it. That was about 10 years ago. JSD turned up unannounced on the Isle of Wight. He wanted me to join him on the moor around a roaring bonfire. Normally the mumbo stomp involves dancing naked to the Wings song Mumbo. But I put paid to that idea and JSD ended up slipping on one of my vinyl records, Joe Dole's I think it was. Nearly burned himself on the bonfire. Anyway, it was quite funny but could have been a disaster. But he still promotes this naked ritual to this day.
That sounds like JSD, or he's certainly a character.
Certainly is. The last I saw of him, he was wearing a Rastafarian wig and had blacked up. All so he could leave the UK on a false passport. Provided by some dodgy bloke from the northwest.
Purple Rossi, a character you wouldn't want to give your bank details to.
Yeah. I think he might have stole my identity on more than one occasion.
Mine too, I reckon.
But I want to get back to the books.
Yeah, the mumbo on the moors with you. And that illegal, purple Rossi stuff is actually in book 2, the JSD Paradox. But let's backtrack. So, in the late 80s, JSD was, apparently, organizing these mumbo gatherings. He'd send out flyers with just a phone number printed on them. Call the number, get the location, number plate, and time. Impossible to verify until someone anonymously gave me one of these ancient flyers. I look closely, there's a name scribbled on it, Uncle Albert. Who's Uncle Albert? Is this JSD's handwriting? Can he even write? Turns out, JSD's early followers had code names. Leaping Armadillo and Single Seagull were others. The only others. Honestly, I reckon he might have just picked some random wildlife names he heard at the zoo. Anyway, the whole JSD thing didn't really take off in Europe in the 90s. But the flyer and phone number became a rave thing. Hundreds of kids would ring the number, get the location, and go get, well, you know. Listen to awful music for hours.
After taking a few substances,
no doubt. So, unknowingly, JSD might have started European rave culture.
But once the new millennium approached, with the advent of the internet, things became a lot clearer, yeah?
Yes, although internet was still dial-up in '99, with all the millennium fever, there was this weird reaction to Paul McCartney re-releases. Wings songs were back on the radio, Paul's big again, and some bloke in the eastern US was pictured mumbo stomping, virtually naked, at a funeral. The story was pulled quick and sharpish. Apparently it was promoting cannibalism on a meat-free Monday, and wrongly claimed McCartney's dear friend was about some cannibalistic ritual. But the original version talked about a John Doe dancing naked to early Paul McCartney stuff, shouting something like, "I don't beat a drum player. But I made alright. I am keeping a layer. Come, I made it alright.
Do you need a handkerchief or some water?
By the early 2000s, John S. Doe was posting online. Nobody knew what the S stood for, but it was something. John something Doe. JSD, the initials, his love for early Paul's solo stuff, offering lifts to attractive women. It was uncanny. Although the maximum comfort in my big barn bed thing probably helped the police's investigation a bit.
And didn't Paul himself inadvertently promote the JSD postulate?
Paul McCartney did indeed drop a bombshell in an interview with Clash magazine. No, he didn't want to marry Yoko Ono, and he's definitely not Bungalow Bill. But he seemed to confirm the whole JSD thing, saying something like, "I was enjoying doing something different. It's like doing the Fireman Project, trying something new." I asked Beatles historian Sid Abbott for his thoughts. He then pointed me to a post on an internet forum. It was by John Doe, or JSD, which I'll read word for word to you. As many know, I am of the opinion that the conventional wisdom on Paul's solo career is wrong. Paul's first 4 solo albums, McCartney, Ram, Wings Wildlife, and Red Rose Speedway, were not the inconsequential, erratic, lightweight fare or even rubbish that the rock press made them out to be because they were mad at Paul for allegedly breaking up the Beatles and because he was not overtly political like Lennon. Rather, Paul was getting it right on those first 4 albums, creating exciting, funky, life-affirming music that looked beyond the Beatles. These were 4 great albums that Paul needed to make to free him of the shipwreck called the Beatles. Paul is human though, and the constant criticism and hammering of him and Linda from 1970 to 1973 caused him to cave and try to go back to being Beatle Paul, and make an album that sounded like Beatles music to appease the critics. Paul, who broke out of the box with his first 4 albums, was forced back into the box of Beatles' past. The result was Band on the Run, a highly competent and polished pop album that was done by the numbers. Paul even covers old Beatles themes as best shown in Bluebird, a happy-go-lucky update on the more serious, and light years better, Blackbird. We even have Sgt. Pepper-like reprises to drive home the point, Beatle Paul is back. Band on the Run, although critically and commercially successful, was an artistic dead end for Paul. And the rot sets in as early as Venus and Mars and continues until Linda's illness, then death, and the disastrous Heather Mills era. This jars Paul back into brilliance and artistic freedom. Evidenced throughout much of Flaming Pie but cemented with chaos and creation in the backyard and Electric Argument, two brilliant albums showing that the circle is completed and Paul is back to where he was starting from with McCartney and Ram. Look at how Ram has been rehabilitated and vindicated in the rock world's eyes. Soon Wings Wildlife will stand among the elite. This is called the JSD Postulate and is why I am so sarcastic and disgusted with Band on the Run getting the first star treatment. Band on the Run was the beginning of the taming of Macca. Paul was free and real on his first 4 albums. Rather than praise Band on the Run, we should mourn it.
I can't agree with most of that, Derek.
Many agree with you, Neil, but there are many who are hardened postulates around the world. While writing my books, I found them in America, Canada, Australia, and of course here in the UK. Although there's also a movement to modernize the postulate and introduce newer songs to it. Up in Liverpool, there's a guy who was always fond of the Speed of Sound album. He used to prop it up in his bedroom window when he was younger. He wanted a Wino Junko Funko stomp, but JSD rejected it. In fact, a lot of his postulates were doing this to him after he escaped from the Albert Halsey Mental Health Center where he was being treated.
Yes, we haven't really covered his breakdown and sectioning. But we're running out of time today. Would you be able to record another segment for our New Year's special?
Certainly, we can get into the Australian part of the story too. Charismatic budgie smuggler salesman Rocco Rawls. The sultry Fiona McCabe, Elvis Presley flipping burgers in a monastery, and the enigmatic and mysterious Dr. Dog.
Thank you, Derek Manchester. Don't forget to tune into part 2 soon, where I also hope to have Sid Avitt, a Beatles historian, with us as well. I'm Neil Vectis, and you've been listening to the Vectisfabber Verdict.
The mood is right, the spirit's up. We're here tonight, and that's enough. Simply having a wonderful Christmas time. Simply having a wonderful Christmas time. The party's on, the feeling's here, that only comes this time of year. Simply having a wonderful Christmas time. Simply having a wonderful Christmas time. A choir of children sing their song. We're simply having a wonderful Christmas time. Simply having a wonderful Christmas time. A choir of children sing their song they've practiced all year long. The party's on, the spirit's up. We're here tonight, and that's enough. We're simply having a wonderful Christmas time. Ooh, we're simply having a wonderful Christmas time. Oh.